We swing it down to Austin, and the legislative session, it's over. A lot of people happy about that. A lot of people happy that the session is over. Joining us right now to kind of put his wrap on things, the guy who's joined us just about every single week throughout the legislative session from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, Chuck DeVore. Chuck, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, and it's really great to be back with you and do a recap talking about what our legislators did over the last few months.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, obviously the budget was covered quite a bit out there, and I do want you to go over that one more time just to, as a recap, but also tell us from your view and, with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, just some of the important things that passed during this session.
Well, I think it's really important to kind of put things into context. First of all, a lot of critics of Texas say that the only reason why we've done well as a state is we have the dumb luck to be sitting on big oceans of oil and natural gas. And what folks don't realize is that the percentage of the economy that is dependent on oil and gas is a lot less today than it was in 1981. It's about only 2/3 of what it was back in the early 80s. And what's happened is we've diversified our economy. And why is this important in the context of the budget and taxes? Well, we have a diverse economy because we have relatively low taxes and less regulation because we have smaller government. And what the legislature did is I think they increased Texas's competitiveness, and they did it by cutting taxes and fees about $4 billion over the next 2 years. So you got about a $2.6 billion cut in the franchise tax. That's the business margin tax, about 25% cut in that. You had about $1.2 billion in the homestead exemption, so lower property taxes for homeowners and for renters, really. And then occupational licensing and other fees were reduced by about $200 million. So that's part one. Part two is they held the budget in check. They actually kept budget growth within population plus inflation, far more restrained than 2 years ago. So this legislature was very fiscally conservative, and that is really important for the long-term health and viability of the Texas economy.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that, like you said, the critics of Texas, they won't pay attention to that, and they'll try to poke holes into it. But this session overall, not only was it good, in my opinion, for this session, but it set up the legislature for, as long as they stick to it, future good sessions as well when it comes to one of the things you brought up, the margins tax.
Absolutely. I mean, if you can keep government spending in check and keep government that we can afford, that we taxpayers can afford, then you're going to have a virtuous cycle. In other words, you'll probably have more businesses moving here, more hiring, more diversification, and that'll generate more taxes. And so you have to keep that cycle going and resist the temptation to spend all the money. And in that vein, this legislature did a very good job, and we're very pleased with that.
Visiting with Chuck DeVore, Texas Public Policy Foundation. What are some of the other issues that were, in your mind, some of the key issues with the Texas Public Policy Foundation that you were taking a look at that the legislature either did not get to or maybe did not do as well as one would have expected?
Yeah, well, in a couple of other areas, we were pretty pleased with some of the criminal justice reform that was enacted this legislative session, as well as holding back on additional occupational licensing requirements. There were at least 12 attempts to license more occupations in Texas, and that is rarely ever done for health and safety of the consumer. It's usually done because some group doesn't want competition, so they put up barriers to entry.
Right.
And we even saw one that got rolled back. Your listeners may be shocked to hear that up until this bill passed, you had to have a barber or cosmetology license to do African hair braiding. Now, in Texas, that license to be a barber requires 1,500 hours of training, which is the same amount of training that you need to be an airline transport pilot and fly a 747.
That makes sense.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, because all you're going to do is braid hair. Like in this case, African hair braiding doesn't even cut hair. You're not even doing what a barber does. And yet, African hair braiders needed a barber or cosmetology license to practice their trade. And as a result, a lot of them did it in their homes, which was technically illegal.
Yeah.
But now we're going to allow them to come out in the open and practice their trade without having to have 1,500 hours of training. So that's a good thing. Another thing that happened was we had a codification of what's known as the rule of lenity in common law. What that means is when a judge looks at an ambiguous criminal statute or a statute that's kind of redundant with another one, the judge is supposed to rule the conflict or the ambiguity in favor of the defendant. And up to this point, that had not been codified in Texas law. We also had another bill that is going to review laws with criminal penalties and laws that have a criminal penalty that are outside of the penal code. You know, we have ways to go to prison in Texas that aren't even in the penal code. Basically, it's criminalization of commercial behavior. For example, all the different ways you can go to prison in Texas for harvesting oysters incorrectly. Those things need to be in the penal code, not somewhere else in the code. And so the legislature has made a move to do that as well. Lastly, what we call a second chances bill, allowing certain ex-offenders who didn't do time in prison to file a petition of non-disclosure 5 years after their conviction was set aside. This is important because it gives people a chance to escape the scarlet letter if they've kept their record clean and have a new start and get a better job. So those are some more good things.
Yeah.
Things undone, we still don't have school choice in Texas. Nevada actually beat us to the punch. Nevada is now the first state with full-on school choice to help children, especially those in failing schools. We still haven't done that in Texas. We've got some work to do on that front.
Yeah, and that's something that I keep hearing from a lot of Republican, quite a few Republican lawmakers out there, is that they were disappointed really in that piece of legislation. But we'll see what happens in the next legislative session down the road. Chuck, what as we wrap up today's interview, what will the Texas Public Policy Foundation continue looking at? You know, what do y'all have cooking? Because you're not just active during the legislative session; you're year round.
Well, that's a great question. What we do is we have a very iterative process. So what we do is we meet with lawmakers, we meet with our allies, we meet with staff, and we ask what their ideas are for the upcoming session. And we get with our board members. We have our staff analysts. We have a lot of feedback, and then we very carefully plan out our research agenda for the next 18 months. And so we'll be turning out reports probably just about every week. You'll see a report or a study come out from us. But all of that is planned well in advance and is focused on what we hope to do to improve Texas, to improve liberty, individual responsibility, and free enterprise in the future. So the sky's the limit. We got a lot of things we're looking at. As I said before, school choice or an improvement to the public education system continues to be one of the top things on our agenda.
Yeah, and people can find out much more information about the Texas Public Policy Foundation on your website, texaspolicy.com. Chuck, appreciate you joining us throughout the session, and we'll visit with you again between now and the next session, obviously, just about the work that the Texas Public Policy Foundation is doing, right on crime, and so many of the other things that y'all are working on.
All right, will do.
All right, Chuck, thanks. Have a great one. That's Chuck DeVore, Texas Public Policy Foundation.